Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this really interesting conference, and also thank you for your patience. I'm not going to give a paper. What I want to do is I'm going to do like a big world tour through a large body of work that I have produced over the past 8 years. And I want to do it because I feel like, first of all, we've listened to a lot of incredibly interesting papers theorizing the online self. And so many of them I was like writing little notes and saying, oh yes, that's what I was doing, or that's what I was thinking of, or that's actually not quite it. But I think that it's would be really interesting to spend the next half hour just looking at work, looking at some artwork that in various ways addresses some of the theoretical questions, or maybe not addresses it, but runs a little bit parallel to them. So I'm not going to theorize. I am going to give you a little context for the work, and then I'm going to show you little bits of it, starting from work from 2009 all the way up to the present. And I know that there's probably about 30% of people in this room that already know the work, so I apologize to you, but there's the 70% that don't, so hopefully it'll add, it will add to the conversation either way. So the work that I'm going to be discussing all draw from online, not all, they all draw from large archives that I collect or create of amateur first-person videos where people position themselves in front of webcams and share their attitudes, their opinions, and their feelings about the world while at the same time viewing themselves in front of a computer screen. So all of the work except one, and I want to talk about that last one in the end, is drawn from found videos online, and one of them I created myself. So out of these archives that I had been collecting, beginning around 2008, which was a really different historical and media moment, out of them I produce montages. So it's not a feed of montages, but I actually create sort of the way that Jody was talking about, where there's a kind of montage experience just in getting online. But I produce my own, where I create kind of both sonically and visually. I produce these collective assemblies of the contemporary shared self, which is characterized, in part by this inward look, sort of a look into the self, as well as a simultaneous outward look at the world, and a self that's both spontaneous and scripted at the same time. So the work, I think of the work, especially the earlier stuff, as a kind of document of a period of media history that doesn't exist anymore, although we are still very much living with its effects. Where, as I was saying, instead of looking out at the world, we're looking in at ourselves, describing the world, and then documenting that kind of that description or the effect of the world. So there's a kind of subjectivization of the world that's being, sort of constantly chronicled and documented that I have been focusing on. And when I began to do the work, the iPhone had only been around for a couple of years, and selfies weren't yet the phenomenon they were to become. And this was also before Google had figured out how to monetize YouTube. So when people made first-person videos online, there wasn't the same kind of polish or potential for fame or product placement that we see now. And I started to look at the videos that I was collecting or sort of archiving as accidental or inadvertent portraits, both individual portraits and collective portraits, marking this and revealing this desire, this kind of urge that people had to be public, to be seen, and to be heard. And because the videos were made, sort of mostly pre-mobile phone, there's also a documentation of the mise en scène of the room, of the space, of the private space that sort of people are organizing and putting props into as they display themselves in public. And so the work also, sort of looks at how people maneuver their bodies, in this confined space, and how they also maneuver their feelings and their personalities, as they accommodate and fit both the formal, technical, and also ideological constraints, of the platforms that they, that they need to negotiate with. And I'm not going to say, I'm giving you a big intro and then I'll show you some stuff. I just wanted to sort of point to a couple things, but I try to represent this impulse, as individual and as collective, but also as always as part of a repetitive and reactive chain. So each video is its own entity, but it's never alone. It always is preceded by and followed by, another video. So there's a kind of propagation that I think of my work as documenting, as these video documents sort of spread through the net and kind of together create torrents of moods, of attitudes, of feelings, where people are sharing, their feelings about the world and its effects. So on the one hand, the work is looking at expressions on commercial platforms, sort of as a space where the privileged form of being is that of the isolated, entrepreneurial individual competing for attention, with many others. On the other hand, it's an attempt to, or it tries to represent and depict cracks within this regime, or attempts that people seem to make, or sort of attempts that seem to be made visible of people pushing against, or these forms or these attitudes pushing against the constraints of this normative neoliberal condition. And the final thing I'll say about it is that, the montages that I create try to go beyond the algorithmic returns that I get in the search engine. So I spend a lot of time digging and kind of digging deep into results and kind of making connections, or as Wendy described before, sort of changing the correlation between videos, to try to make connections that wouldn't otherwise be made by the algorithm, by the opaque algorithms that are, sort of privileging popularity and other things that may benefit the platforms. And so within the edited assembly, there's a kind of attempt to show this mingling of subjectivities that hint at other possibilities, kind of fleeting and virtual assembly of effective collectives. Okay, so the first work that I'm going to just show a little fragment from is the earliest piece that I did in this series. It's called Mass Ornament, and the title comes from an essay by Ziegfeld Krakauer, a German theorist who in 1927 was analyzing the popular forms of entertainment of the 1920s, chorus line dancers. And he was basically looking at the way this line of dancers resembled workers in a factory where their bodies were, sort of reduced to synchronized movements of limbs that produce an abstraction that they have no direct access to, sort of like workers in a factory who have no direct access to, sort of the abstraction that they were producing. And I was thinking about similarities and differences between the 1920s and 30s and 2008 when I was making this work, which was during the financial crisis. And I was thinking about sort of how this kind of new forms of entertainment, both watching and making, on the one hand, reflected a kind of aesthetic embodiment of post-Fordism, where people are, sort of doing the same moves, but they're doing it in their separate private spaces. They're self-managed rather than having a manager outside. They're but they're also the same in their difference. So that was part of what I was looking at in this piece. And then on the other hand, I was looking at the pleasure, like the pleasure in the dance, the pleasure in sort of the moves that people were making that were casual and unpolished, where bodies weren't conforming to mass ideals, where people seemed to almost push against the edges of the frames that, they were also at the same time encased within. So I am not going to say any more about it. I'm going to show you it's an installation, and it sort of has surround sound, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't have time, but I'm going to show you 2 short sections from this. So if you could lower the lights. And this is very low resolution, so you probably can't see, but that's a view count that's below each one of the videos. In the regular projection, you would see that. Another little clip from this. Is there someone who can turn up the volume?
That's it. I need to go.
So I think that the sound was a little bit low, but the soundtracks mix two soundtracks from the 1930s films where bodies are moving in mass. One of them is Busby Berkeley's what is it? Which one is it? I'm blanking. Gold Diggers of 1935, which has this 100 people doing a tap dance together, like the largest tap dance sequence in cinema at that time, and then Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. You know, sort of these 2 different kinds of sort of depictions of bodies and moving in synchronicity. And then on top of that, I added sounds of separate bodies in separate spaces. So at the music kind of pulls everything together, and these sort of breathing, thumping, rubbing, scraping the edges of the space kind of pushes it apart. So you have this tension between, this kind of collective and the singularity. The singularity. Ooh, we're not going to talk about that today. So the next work I'm going to just sort of race through is, because it's already been 15 minutes. Oh my goodness. is called Testament, also from this time period, 2008. And I started working with vlogs or video diaries where people were kind of narrating sort of expressions of self in front of the camera. And I structured this, the piece is made up of a series of chapters. I'm going to show you a little bit from 2 short chapters. It's a multi-channel installation, so the projections sort of often are displayed around a space and masses of people kind of are moving and looking at these kind of masses of speakers who look back at them. If the last work was a chorus line, in this one I was thinking about the Greek chorus, where, in the Greek chorus, there's a kind of circle of ordinary citizens or people who are sort of surrounding the kings and the gods who are making decisions, and they are responding. They're kind of mediating the actions, or sort of the evil or positive things that the kings and gods have done, and kind of negotiating that with the audience. Okay, so I am not going to say anything else about this. I'm going to show you two very short chapters. The first one, okay.
So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my medications.
I'm on Cabot 500 milligrams. I'm on Seroquel 50 milligrams once before bedtime.
I'm taking
Risperdal.
Celexa. 40 milligrams of Prozac and half a milligram of Xanax at night.
I'm in the process of switching medication.
From
lithium
to carbamazepine,
to
duloxetine, and citalopram,
to
Prestige.
And now I'll take
Ambien,
Ritalin, Abilify,
Veldox,
Fluoxetine,
Lexapro,
Paxil,
Lorazepam,
Trazodone,
and Clonopin. And I'm
feeling
gonna-
much better.
Okay, I want to show you a very short section of another chapter.
So today,
Really?
I entered a new phase
Sucked.
in my life.
I went into work,
Like any other day,
and my clock-in card is missing.
And so my manager comes up to me.
One of
and
our
says,
directors called me into an office.
My bosses called me in the office and said,
I want to talk to you.
And I wasn't sure what was going on.
I was
but,
expecting
I went
something
down,
bad to happen.
and basically one of the larger people in the company and someone from Human Resources was there.
And next thing you know, the hiring manager walked in
And he started off with, well, this is a part of the job I really don't like.
And I'm
He said,
like,
Jesse, you
what
don't
the
need
fuck?
to go any
What's
further.
going
You
on?
tell me
I was
I'm
like,
unemployed.
You firing me?
Fired,
It's
aren't
like,
I?
no.
He says, yes, we're gonna,
And they were
the
like,
route's not making enough money.
we're
I
really
said, no.
sorry.
When does it
You're a
start?
really great worker, but unfortunately,
the
Business has not been good. The guys have been sitting around the shop
Just sit around
in large numbers.
people that were walking by to come over, and then the owner cut everybody's hours down to like nothing.
And myself and a lot of other people.
Between my center and the other center
a good
and
1,000 or so
city,
people.
my entire department was
600
officially
people were
laid off.
Which is it's not a good thing.
Okay, I'm going to stop that. There. Right at the suspenseful moment. So most of these were made in 2008, around 2008, of course, because the piece was done in 2009. So a lot of people were being laid off. So the next work that I'm going to just talk about is called Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See. And it is a work that is composed like Testament. I mean, it's a kind of a chapter of Testament, a longer one, of fragments of video diaries, where in this case, instead of talking directly about themselves, people are describing a series of media scandals or conspiracy theories or rumors involving 4 famous African-American men, each of whom had obtained power, wealth, fame, or celebrity in spaces historically dominated by white men. And what I do is I weave together the different storylines, dropping the name of the man, so he's never mentioned. And what's left is this kind of patterns, these sort of tropes, and repeating language, at the intersection of power and celebrity and race, where the different narrators are kind of defining the spaces they think African American men can safely or legitimately occupy. So all of the video diaries that I collected were made around between 2008 and 2011. And just to contextualize that, that was the early days of the Obama era, which was a period that in the United States, many people were, even if we did not buy the mainstream rhetoric that this was a post-racial time, which, it's hard to believe now that people could have even thought that. It's so sad. But even knowing that was a fiction, there was still a kind of hope, magnificent hope that, sort of an African-American man could occupy that position. I mean, there was still this, there was it was really a quite a momentous thing. But what happened instead is what we're living with now. As, again, I probably don't have to say this, but, sort of the kind of white, racist underbelly just lurking beneath the surface started to become empowered, and sort of things were said, as I think the panel talked about that this morning. I don't remember if it was Jody or if it was Wendy. We're talking about, sort of things were said that would never have been said before, that would have been thought before but not said. And so there was something about the intersection of social media and Obama, and what that represented, and a kind of certain kind of popular sort of understanding that there was something changing demographically in the United States that allowed certain kinds of speech to be to surface. So I exhibited this piece for the first time in 2012. And the way it was shown was I had 18 monitors around a room, and a viewer was sort of placed in the center. So again, there was a kind of Greek chorus experience, and was a narrative that you had to follow as it sort of came at you from ricocheting, in a sense, around the room. And so there was almost like a physical manifestation, like you were immersed within this space of opinions, of different people, sort of with something at stake, or that felt like something at stake. When I made it, this was before Black Lives Matter. It was before, when I showed the work, that was when, if those of you that know American, sort of follow the American news, it was before Trayvon Martin had been shot. I remade this last summer into a film, and it was a really hard thing to do, but it felt really important for me because it just, the kind of speech and the kind of sort of what the work was doing eerily seemed to kind of foretell the fraught nature of sort of the contemporary political crisis that we are now living with in the United States and also throughout the world, with kind of sort of the political populism. And so the work is, sort of speaks to the personalizing of the news, the monologues replacing dialogues, this kind of cacophonous echo chambers where both, bigoted and thoughtful views are often leveled and undifferentiated. And also it sort of talks to the way this kind of torrent of emotions appear around single news items or events that amplify commonalities, but also widen and deepen antagonisms. So the work is also, speaking of the online self, the way I remade it, it's very much a portrait film. And I see the, sort of the vlogs as self-portraits of people as they're, sort of lingering in front of the camera, speaking, kind of taking drags of their cigarette, sipping on their wine, and watching themselves as they kind of share their positions. So I'm going to show you, it's a 24-minute film, and I now have 5 minutes left, so I'm not going to get to my last piece, which is very sad, but I'm going to just jump around and show you little bits of this work.
I have the feeling that this could have turned out differently had things not progressed the way that they had. But before we jump to conclusions, we need to make sure we have all the
Go straight to the
facts
facts.
regarding the situation.
You know, here are the facts.
It's April 27th, 2011.
And you can make your own decision.
And this just happened.
I'm about to talk about it right now.
Let's just look at the facts.
Okay, I'm gonna jump.
Now, before I go into that, I gotta ask one question. How is it possible that once he got inside his house,
Police mistook him for a burglar. In his own house. Outside his own home.
In his own home.
don't you know that that's that man's damn house?
Sir, I do have to ask you
Excuse
for
me,
some
sir, can you show me your ID?
You gotta show your ID.
So that he can verify who you are.
Nobody seems to even know who he truly is.
And we need to talk about that.
Even here in the Netherlands, they're talking about it.
Now, here's the part that's a little curious about the official story.
The details are as ambiguous as his racial background.
That makes you kind of go,
There's something wrong with the story.
The story keeps actually changing about what happened.
This is what happened, okay? The Negro was acting up. He was belligerent.
He challenged the white man's authority. You know, you can see it in that guy's eye.
Do we know who this man is?
I don't know who that motherfucker is.
Nah.
Do we know what he does? Yo, may I
Break it down, brother.
Yo.
Break it.
Don't lie to me, boy.
I always thought he was black.
So, in the 2 minutes I have left, there was a final project that I wanted to talk about, and I want to just tell you about it, even though I'm not going to show it. It is, because in some ways, even this is something I revisited last summer, but this was a project that I completed in 2016, and it's a 45-minute film, and in a way it sort of speaks back to some of this work that you were just looking at. And in it, instead of collecting videos online, I produced my own archive, and it was an archive that, as far as I could find online, didn't, or in social media, either didn't exist or didn't surface, where people were kind of systematically addressing their own experiences of precarity. I mean, that happens a little bit in Laid Off, but I wanted to talk to people who had felt the most impact from not just the financial crisis, but from the kind of deepening, sort of inequality that in many ways, over the 20 years that the internet had gone public had gotten, sort of deeper and wider. And so I wanted to kind of use the same tools or these same forms, of the isolated frame that both, sort of speaks to the kind of isolated individual, but also allows, in its collectivity, allows even quiet voices to be heard or every face to be seen. And so I kind of appropriated those forms and built an archive where I went around for a year and interviewed people for over an hour and spoke to them at homeless shelters, at food banks, at job training centers, about the stories and the narratives and the descriptions they thought were missing, about the experiencing of living with little or no money in the United States. So I used very similar forms, but they end up being quite differently used, and the relationships are very different because of the length of time that I spent with people And out of that, I produced this film that I now have 13 seconds left, so you're not going to get to see, but you'll have to invite me back. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.